So good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's LinkedIn Ads Masterclass. In today's session, we're going to be hearing from Lee Gannon, who is our Head of Paid Social here at Receptional. Lee joined the business about 18 months ago with a particular focus on growing our paid social offerings for both LinkedIn and Facebook. Prior to working at the agency, Lee has also worked client-side as a marketing manager for a tech startup company, so he has experience from both sides of the table. And I'm Simon Lachlan, the Business Development Manager at Receptional, and I'll be your host for today. So now let's take a look at what's coming up in today's session. We will start off by taking you through a platform introduction, followed by audience targeting, before discussing creative best practices. Finally, we'll take a look at the all-important offers and lead magnets. At the end of today's masterclass, we will be running a Q&A session, so if there's anything that anybody would like to ask us, then please use the questions box which you'll find in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So with that being said then, I shall now hand you over to Lee.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hopefully I've successfully unmuted myself. I'm sure we'll soon find out. So yeah, first and foremost, thanks everyone for your time this morning. Really appreciate it. We're going to cram a lot into half an hour, but leave plenty of time for questions. So as Simon said, do just drop them as they come to you. I thought a good place to start really was, why LinkedIn ads in the first place? Why make this part of your marketing strategy? And I suppose what makes LinkedIn a bit different from some of the other platforms as well. So you won't kind of be surprised to know that LinkedIn pretty much has a monopoly as kind of the kind of sole professional network. We're up to sort of 700 plus million active users, and it's growing very, very rapidly each year. But what sets apart the average LinkedIn user to say the average Snapchat or TikTok user is probably affluence and also influence as well. So a statistic I quite like is that 4 in 10 millionaires supposedly have a profile, and a lot of more senior people in a professional capacity, people of influence as well. So it's a really, really good place, probably the best place to be reaching decision makers. I think trust is really important within the context of social media advertising as well. So in the last 12 months, 18 months, I think it's fair to say that Facebook's been dragged through the mud a little bit around some of the privacy concerns. So it's important to reiterate that LinkedIn for the last few years has been voted the #1 most trusted social platform. So I would say it's quite a brand friendly place to be advertising. And finally, I think there exists something called the LinkedIn mindset. So if we compare, the motivations of a user to some of those other channels, Facebook being the key example here, we seem to have higher level motivations for being on the channel. So improving our career, searching for new opportunities, and ultimately learning, whether that's from leaders, industry experts, or just our peers. And I do believe that the most effective social media advertising, or the most effective advertising in general, really does consider platform alignment. So I think we can bear this in mind when we come to the kind of content section of today's session. So that's kind of why LinkedIn, but let's move on to the who. So who should be advertising on the platform? We've already said it's the home to B2B, so you won't be surprised to see this as the first bullet point on the list. But I've got a little bit of a caveat here. So what I would say is that you do need a reasonably significant deal size to be advertising on LinkedIn. What do I mean by reasonable? Well, I think you're probably not going to be able to sell a £10 per month SaaS product very effectively, because your margin is going to be too small to kind of accommodate maybe a typical cost per acquisition. But if you are selling more expensive products, thousands of pounds, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, if you're running enterprise, then there's certainly a lot of opportunity for you on the platform. Similarly, if we move to B2C, I think sometimes people just throw B2C out entirely when it comes to LinkedIn. But I do think, again, that there's some opportunity, and I think it's along the same battle lines. So we're talking about high customer value. The verticals you tend to see, or I see in my own feed, I would say, are automotive brands, financial services companies, maybe luxury goods. So exactly the same rule of thumb applies. Recruiters, higher education, these are perfect fits for the targeting, but probably a little bit beyond today's scope. My final point is, I would say a curveball, and this is I think even kind of beyond those first 4 bullet points, I think there is a use case for LinkedIn where you're in a niche market and you can't really readily access your audience through other advertising platforms. So we're going to come on to some of the targeting features with LinkedIn, but job titles, industry, company name, these are things that maybe only LinkedIn can provide with any kind of impact. In which case, I think there's a really good case to be testing LinkedIn for your brand as well. Just to preempt any budget questions, because there's always budget questions, how much money do you need to get started? Well, I would typically recommend about £3,000 a month to spend on the platform, mainly because it works out at about £100 per day, which in my experience is enough bandwidth to test 2, 3, 4 audiences simultaneously. And really it's that testing that we want to bring to the platform. So you can certainly advertise with a smaller budget, but you're just going to have less bandwidth and probably less impact for your efforts as well. How do we approach LinkedIn ads as an agency at Receptional? Well, I think there's a framework across sort of digital advertising that I like to shamelessly steal, and that is the AMO framework. So AMO stands for audience, message, and offer. And in terms of the process, when we get a brief across the table, when you're planning out your own activity, this is the kind of order in which I'd like to do things. So first and foremost, you need to do some audience profiling. We're then looking to map that audience that we want to target onto the platform features. And then we're thinking about alignment when it comes to our messaging and the offer that might resonate with a particular audience. So I think this could be a helpful way for you to plan out your own campaigns, and we're going to be walking through each of these 3 pillars this morning as the backbone of the session. So straight into audience targeting, and again, just to reiterate, if you've got any questions at any point, do jot them down before you kind of forget them by the end. So who is your target audience? Before you can set up a LinkedIn campaign, you're going to need a clear sense of who you want to target. And hopefully, I think a lot of this work maybe has already been previously done. It's informing some of your other marketing channels, but you might need to tailor it to LinkedIn, because first and foremost, we're interested in the characteristics of your audience that we can actually reach through the platform. So I like to put these into 2 buckets. On the one hand, you've got individual characteristics, and on the other, you've got the company's attributes, which we sometimes call like firmographics. So you're probably going to be using a combination of these to plan out your audiences or plan out your campaigns. So when we're going through that mapping process, there are some kind of common questions that I find super useful to build into your brief. So first and foremost, job title targeting is probably the most common place to start on LinkedIn, making sure you've got a strong list of those. Beyond the title, which department do they belong to? How senior are those people? And then a question I always like to ask is, do they have any specialist skills, or maybe are there particular tools that go with a particular role? So a nice example, I think, is maybe you want to target marketing managers, but let's say we're promoting today's session, we're doing a webinar on LinkedIn advertising. It might not be relevant for every marketing manager. It might be relevant to marketing managers with an interest in digital or a skill in advertising or social media. So you can see how taking it a step further beyond the job title to specific skills can allow you to get a lot closer to your target audience. Finally, do they share an education background? I think this is useful for some clients, less so other verticals. Moving on to the company side, my favorite question, and I think this is a really important one to get kind of the wider team's buy-in, would be, do you have a list of target accounts? I like to phrase this as like a dream list of kind of prospects or clients. And I would really encourage you to talk to the sales team. I think this is where you can get the broader team's buy-in. If you can be including or actively targeting the same accounts that your sales team's going after, you're certainly going to be getting in their good books and marrying up your wider efforts as a company very nicely indeed. Beyond specific accounts, which industries do they represent, and then a sense of the company's size. So sometimes we get briefs where the kind of target company is specified in terms of revenue, but it's a really important point just to mention that we can't actively target company by revenue, but what we can do is we can target by headcount. So I would use that as a useful proxy when you're building out your audiences. And then finally, where are they based? That you always need a sense of location with your kind of advertising campaigns online. Having gone through that list, hopefully that gives you some ideas for doing your own audience mapping. But I wanted to just flag kind of two common challenges that I often come up against. And the first one is that absolutely everyone and their mum seems to want to target the C-suite. So, whenever you speak to a sales director, they want to target the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the CTO, anything CO something. And there's a few problems here. I think first and foremost, high demand equals high cost. So these are some of the most expensive audiences around. Second issue is there aren't many of these people at the companies you need, so you're going to need a broad audience to be able to reach just a handful of people at each company. And then finally, I just ask yourself, how many CEOs do you know that have the time to be scrolling through LinkedIn, have the time to be reading your ebook, signing up for webinars? I think the answer is probably not many of them. So to overcome this challenge, what LinkedIn tends to recommend is this concept of a buying committee. So instead of targeting, the head honcho, you're looking to target a broader group of people that carry some level of influence. So the way I like to think about it is you're looking to trade up the chain. So by including more kind of mid-level, maybe even junior people, you can then nurture those people, build relationships, and kind of get referrals and hopefully turn them into advocates for your brand or product. So I would certainly kind of take the blinkers off and think about the wider opportunity, because by targeting the broader spectrum of people, it's going to lower your cost to advertise as well. What I would probably add on that point actually before I forget is, I think the length of your sales cycle is worth taking into consideration. If you're B2B product and it takes sort of 12 months for your deals to close, well then maybe targeting a manager today, maybe next year they are a director, or maybe they change companies, as people often do nowadays. So I would focus less on target accounts and maybe more on the individual and building kind of champions for your brand. The second challenge is probably, one of the biggest challenges in marketing in general, and certainly in advertising. And that's just the lack of prioritization in terms of your audience segments. So we often get briefs where there's half a dozen audience profiles or personas, but there's only so much budget. So you really need to prioritize to where you're going to have the highest impact. So I would ask yourselves a few questions. First and foremost, which of the segments that you've mapped out maybe have the highest value to you? Second question would be, which of the segments lend themselves the best to the targeting features available? So that's just a kind of practical sense of what we can achieve. And then finally, we're going to talk about offer later, but where is your offer the most compelling? Who are you the best fit for? And hopefully these lenses will allow you to make good audience targeting choices. In the interest of just cramming as much value into today's session, I'm just going to do some rapid fire kind of targeting tips to cover questions that I've often been asked in previous sessions. So the first question is usually about audience size. And my sweet spot for sponsored content is somewhere between 20 and 100,000 people per audience. Much larger than this in my experience, and your segments aren't tight enough. It can be quite hard to control your budget and where you're actually seeing results. So I'd encourage audiences that you to kind of trim down audiences that are much bigger than this. And then on the flip side of the equation, I would say if you go much smaller than 20,000, if you're targeting 1,000 people, for example, you're not going to be able to spend any budget consistently. You're going to saturate the audience very quickly, and then you're going to have a limited impact. So that is my rough rule of thumb. Second tip then is about job title targeting. So I've said it's a great place to start, and I stand by that. But there was a study that suggested that actually LinkedIn only recognizes about 30% of all job titles. So if this is, all of your strategy, then quite frankly, you're potentially leaving as much as 70% of the opportunity on the table. So I would encourage you to use job title targeting, but to hedge it and to test it against other strategies, like job function, or indeed member skills and groups, which is the next tip. So I think this is a really, really underrated feature. And the best use case I have for it is allowing you to do really, really niche laser targeting. So you can either use it to make an audience smaller by overlaying it on top of a broader audience. I think we had quite a nice example about marketing managers on my previous slide. Or alternatively, you can use it to broaden out an audience. So let's say you've got a list of really niche job titles, your audience size is too small. Well, think about skills that only that audience would have. Think about groups that only that audience would belong to, and you can use it to add more people into your audience as well. Next tip is just a setting when you're building out campaigns. There's a little button that says, would you like to expand this audience? And the answer is no, you absolutely would not. This is allowing LinkedIn to add other people into your targeting parameters. But ultimately, you've just spent time carefully putting together a really, really tight audience. So you don't want to take the risk of LinkedIn adding less relevant people and undoing all your good work. And then finally, I think audience targeting is just as much about who you don't want to target. So I would always encourage clients to have a master exclusions list. So exclude your employees, have a list of competitors that you want to exclude from clicking on your ads and wasting your budget. And then think about other sort of undesirables, to use a bit of a negative word. Maybe there are industries that you just don't serve, or levels of seniority that aren't appropriate. Final slide on targeting, and this is, we've spoken about prospecting and reaching new audiences, but I don't want you to neglect your warm audiences either. In the last sort of 12 to 18 months, I would say LinkedIn has hugely improved a lot of this side of the platform. So it's added a lot of features around retargeting. So we can now retarget by, beyond kind of your typical website visitor retargeting. We can do people that have engaged with your events, people that have clicked on your lead forms, people that have visited your company page, people that have watched some of your video content as well. So I would build all of these out ahead of time, so you've got them there ready to leverage in the future. So we're on to our second pillar, which is creative. And I'm going to focus again today, in the interest of prioritization, on my number one ad format, which is sponsored content. So for anyone that doesn't know what sponsored content is, it's kind of a fancy word just for the kind of feed-based ads that you'll probably be the most familiar with. There's a few reasons I'm focusing on this format, and mainly because I would suggest that actually you should be focusing on this format as well. It's the most versatile in terms of the formats it supports. It can run images, carousel videos. In terms of the objective, you can run traffic to your website, or you can attach lead forms, which we'll come on to later. And it also serves on mobile and desktop, so it's the kind of prime real estate where you're going to get the most eyeballs in front of your ads as well. So it's the most versatile, most impactful. And in terms of where it gets its name from, you can either create dedicated ads, which is what we do most of the time, or alternatively, you can boost your organic content, so hence sponsored content, which can be a nice way to kind of marry your paid and organic LinkedIn strategies. I've put together a quick checklist to help you evaluate, your own ads. So these are some questions that I think are useful. So first and foremost, for me, I always ask, does the visual element of the ad speak for itself? So if I imagine I'm scrolling through my feed, my eye goes to the banner first, or the video, maybe then to the headline, and then up to the description. That's how I think most brains work. So really the visual element is probably the most important. Does this ad make sense if I haven't read the attending copy, is the answer, is the question you should be looking to answer. Secondly, is it branded? You know, if I've got a split second to digest this ad, do I know who's reaching me? That's important for ad recall. And then would it stop me scrolling is, you know, the key question. I suppose that's the ultimate litmus test, isn't it, really, with a feed-based ad. Is the messaging clear, and is there a kind of strong call to action? Pretty kind of standard stuff there. So maybe if we evaluate this Wix ad against this checklist, I think that it's fair to say they do a pretty good job. So in terms of, does the visual element speak for itself? You know, I know who this ad is for, designing for health tech. I know what this ad is. It says it's a podcast. In terms of it being branded, it says, you know, by Wix, and there's brand colors there. And I think the colors are probably what is most effective when it comes to stopping me scroll as well. We've got the bright yellow, we've got the contrast. So on the whole, I think they've done a pretty good job. The messaging is clear, the text is short, and there's a consistent call to action. Listen now, listen now. So big thumbs up from me, Wix. If you want a more objective way to analyze your ads, because I get some people kind of work that way instead of being a bit more subjective, I find it really useful to have some kind of benchmarks that you can kind of bring to mind. And the key one here is the average click-through rate on a sponsored content ad is about 0.4%. So this is the benchmark at which to hold your own ads up to. You want to be aiming for sort of 0.5%, and if you're achieving 1% or higher, then you're doing a fantastic job, and it's really going to be helping bring down your cost per click. So hats off to you guys. So split testing is, you know, the key to good creative, and you know that the kind of motto of incremental improvement. There are loads of, you know, I'm sure there are loads of fancy split testing tools available to you, but at Reception we favor an old-fashioned spreadsheet, to be honest with you. We build out what we like to call a messaging matrix, and this crude table is a simple example of what that might look like. So we just want a grid with different assets, the opportunity to write in your headline, your description, etc., etc. And I truly believe just the sheer act of planning out your ads on a spreadsheet outside of the platform just makes you so much more intentional than if you're logging in and just writing, you know, ads quite sporadically. There's something about planning it out side by side that I just think really lifts performance over time. In terms of split testing, number of ads per audience, 2 to 4 at the most. Anything more than that, and you're just not going to be collecting meaningful results anytime soon. And running 1 ad per audience is just a crime. Enough said, I think, on there. So my practical tip, if we're launching a new account, we might do a simple 2x2 grid. So what do I mean by that? Well, I take 2 versions of your visual element, so image A, image B, and then I might run 2 types of copy. So copy 1, copy 2, marry them together, and you get 4 ads per audience, and you're going to be able to collect results and work out which of the 2 variables is driving the best performance, and then iterate that process over time. Which is a really effective way of improving your results. And if anyone needed any inspiration for split testing, we've got some examples there. So the length of the copy, the type of the image, whether or not you're being emotive, or maybe you're including a statistic or an open question, these types of things. Final slide on creative, and it's probably my favorite piece of advice for the whole deck. And that is to snoop on your competition. So a lot of people don't realize that actually whatever ads are being run are in the public domain, so you can find out what anyone is running at any one time, and the same goes for on Facebook as well. So to do this on LinkedIn, you need to head over to someone's company page, let's say a competitor's company page. You can select posts from the menu, and then we can filter by the paid posts, so by picking the ad button. And this is literally going to call up a feed of the ads that they're running at the moment. And this is just a brilliant way to do some competitor research and inform your own activity. I would go so far as creating what we call a swipe folder in the industry. So print screen the ads that you like, and save them. You can share them with your own team. You can send them off to your designers for some inspiration. And it's a really, really good way of getting started on the creative side of LinkedIn. If I gave you like an even more advanced tip, I would say, beyond just the banners and the copy that you can see, believe it or not, you can actually click through to your competitors' landing pages. And if they're running lead gen, you can actually see the forms that they're running, so the fields that they're collecting. And that can be a really, really good way of trying to work out how you might want to play something. So if you're wondering, are my competitors collecting phone numbers, or are they just doing email capture? Well, then a quick exercise can get you those answers. We're on to the final pillar, and I appreciate I'm going quickly. I'm just trying to get as much value in as possible and then give you guys loads and loads of time for questions. So offers and lead magnets, which is something we'll discuss shortly. I think it's important to reflect where LinkedIn sort of sits in the marketing funnel. At Receptional, we're a bit kind of funnel crazy. You will always see a marketing funnel in one of our decks. So I think the biggest mistake I often see with LinkedIn is people running, very salesy, high commitment, direct response ads, call to action being book a demo, speak to sales, something of that nature, running that message to cold traffic. And to cold traffic that probably hasn't heard of you, probably isn't in the market for what you do right now, and you're just setting yourself up for failure most of the time. It's jumping straight to the marriage proposal before you've done any level of kind of nurturing. So where does LinkedIn fit in? And for me, its place on the marketing funnel is somewhere sort of mid to upper funnel, I would say. So we're in the territory of awareness and consideration in that buyer's journey. And our goal really is to educate our prospects and to begin to nurture them as a relationship. So the KPI that I would, encourage you to measure your own campaigns by, isn't maybe closed sales. That maybe can come later with some offline data. It's more likely to be marketing qualified leads, which is the MQL. Identifying target prospects, initiating a relationship, and then passing that on to sales or to other areas of your marketing activity, like your email marketing, for example. The success of any ad is going to be dependent on the promise behind it. So this is what we call that offer. And really the key question is, what would be of value to my audience? It's got to be audience centric here. And in terms of the flywheel, I think we can start by auditing the content that we've got available, identifying content that might be a good fit, or maybe acknowledging that we might need to create something if our campaign is going to be the success that we want it to be. And then once we've and kind of only once we've got that kind of covered, can we go to the audience mapping exercise that we covered earlier, making sure that we're aligning it with our audience, and then looking at how we might nurture the relationship post LinkedIn, whether that's remarketing campaigns or email marketing or something of that nature. I mentioned lead magnets earlier, so everyone's on the same page. What do I mean by lead magnet? Most of the time we're talking about a content offer, but really it's any offer that has enough value to your target audience that they would kind of trade their contact information for. So it's a fancy way for sort of talking about gated content, let's be honest. In terms of some good examples that we've run across accounts and that I'm sure you'll have seen in your own feed, industry trends and kind of challenges. I'm a big fan of checklists and cheat sheets. I think these are kind of shorter form, but and kind of easier to create, to be honest, but can provide just as much value. The kind of BuzzFeed style guide, 10 points, 5 reasons why. Any kind of annualized addition to something, particularly as we get to December and January, and then thinking beyond downloadable content to webinars or event invitations and things of that nature. The main question is, we can kind of spitball and brainstorm what would be good for our audience, but there's a good chance that, you know, as marketers, we don't belong to our target audience. So in these instances, I would encourage you to try and speak to customers or prospects and just ask them firsthand, you know, what kind of content would they be interested in? What would they trade their information for? Maybe that's picking up the phone, emails, or running something like a LinkedIn poll, to be honest with you. I think you can save yourself a lot of time by speaking to your customers up front, rather than putting together a 20-page masterpiece of white paper that, you know, no one really is interested in, and they would have preferred a one-page template or something of that nature. Just trying to think. So other tips for lead magnets. I think something I would say is don't be afraid to repurpose. I think is something we've often done in the past. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Maybe there's an ebook that you wrote last year that can be refreshed, or potentially, you know, you can recover things. So if you want to change the title, add a few industry specific examples into something, and swap out the cover page, well then, you know, maybe you've got a new shiny piece of content then that you could run to a specific audience. So yeah, I think that's a good trick to have up your sleeve. Final slide from me, and you know, we've spoken about lead magnets. I've kind of alluded to the forms earlier, so I just wanted to pay this a little bit of lip service. I'm a big proponent of the lead gen form on LinkedIn. So for anyone that isn't familiar with this, we've got a bit of a demo going on screen there. But these are the native forms that pop up and are pre-populated from someone's profile. So this saves you having to visit their website. And as a result, it's just a more frictionless experience. You tend to get a higher number of people converting, and can be a really, really good place to start. So the average form converts at about 13%. Again, I think that's a benchmark that I'd be writing down to evaluate against your own campaigns. Whereas you know, a landing page, what we're talking 2% potentially. So there is that trade-off. You're going to get higher volume of leads for sure, and you might see lower quality. But for me, if you're a first-time LinkedIn advertiser, if you've got limited budget, maybe your landing pages aren't fantastic, or you're running an offer that isn't proven, I would rather go down the volume route to begin with, collect information, get a good sample of leads, drill down into that lead quality, and then see if you can improve your targeting afterwards, or even pivot to landing pages later. Then start with a landing page that isn't going to convert, that's going to only deliver, you know, a handful of conversions that you're not really going to be able to read too much into. So I'm a big champion of this particular format, and most of my clients are running sponsored content with lead generation forms to downloadable content, which is obviously what I've tried to convey this morning. That is my session. So I've crammed a lot in. I've 3 minutes over, so I do apologize, but hopefully there was some value there, and I'm more than happy to stay on and take any questions that someone might have.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee. I think, as always, you've covered off some very good points there, and I'm sure that everyone who's joined us today has got some useful takeaways from them. So just before we head over to the questions then, we actually have a bundle of ebooks available for anybody that's joined us today. So if you'd like a copy of one of these or all of these, then please just drop us an email to let us know. The ebooks consist of things like a LinkedIn ads checklist, a guide on how to set up analytics, and finally a lead magnets guide as well, which has 25 examples of content. So there's some really nice information available for you there if you're interested. We will also be sending out a copy of the slides and, of course, a very quick survey. So if you could take 30 seconds just to fill that out, because your feedback is, of course, really important to us. We like to hear about what you thought of the session, but also what topics you'd like us to cover off in the future. So with that being said then, let's head over to the questions. So we've got a handful of questions here. Let me just try and pick the hardest ones for Lee. So question number one, Lee, what would be a suitable minimum amount of time to test campaigns on LinkedIn? I think that's a good one.
Okay, yeah, good question. So I think we spoke about a minimum budget, didn't we? So this is the other angle, which is a time period. We like to kind of run for about 3 months, to be honest with you. I think that's how we kind of treat new clients. We tend to sign up for what we call like a pilot period. So rather than jumping into a 12-month program, we would run for 12 months at around the level of spend and above that we suggested, sort of £5,000 and above. Over 3 months will get you enough data, I think. The time period does depend on how much you're spending. Obviously, if you're spending 15 grand over a month, then that's kind of broadly the same as 5 grand over three. So as long as you get to a reasonable minimum level of spend, it doesn't really matter if you do it over 2 to 3 months. But I think 3 months gives you a nice amount of time to pivot
Mm,
and kind of change your strategy a little bit.
brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee. The next one then, you briefly mentioned other ad formats like message ads. When would you recommend using these, and have you got any tips?
Yeah, so I did have message ads and other formats on the screen. I did skip that slide quite quickly, so fair, good question. Um, Message ads in particular, there's a few things I probably want to mention. Um, Message ads and conversation ads, same sort of umbrella, are a bit different from the other ad formats in that instead of paying every time someone clicks on your ad, you actually pay every time that you send out a message. So think of message ads. These are the in-mail ads, messages that you might have seen on your own profile. These are when the kind of paid ones that slip into your inbox, basically. And I like to think of it as email marketing 2.0. Really, you're kind of blanket sending out email messages, and you're paying per send. So I would consider that is an important thing to bear in mind because if you write a really great message ad and loads of people click on it and convert, then your cost can be very low because you're paying per send and it's not dependent on the number of clicks. But on the flip side, if no one opens it, no one clicks on your ad, then you're paying the same price regardless. So I tend to not lead with them just because they're higher stakes. But if you've played around with LinkedIn and your targeting is pretty good, then I think the use cases might be remarketing, so targeting a smaller pool of people, um, or maybe offers that are a bit more personable, a bit more conversational. So if you've got an invitation or something like a webinar, maybe that's more appropriate to send over as a message rather than something too salesy like a demo. That might be a good fit to give a bit of a wish-washy answer on that one.
That's cool, thank you. A question here on bidding strategies as well. What would you recommend, manual or automated?
Yeah, bidding. So this is an important area that I appreciate we didn't have time to cover. So thank you for the question. My rule of thumb is to always start with manual bidding. And what you'll see when you go to set up manual bidding is that LinkedIn will spit out a range. So it will say something like, we recommend you bid £7.50. Other advertisers are bidding between £5 and £10. And LinkedIn will want you to obviously bid as high as possible, but in my experience, you can often lowball the manual bid. So there's a strategy called finding the floor bid. So if you put in, say, £1 as your bid, LinkedIn will reject that and probably come back and tell you in kind of red angry letters that the minimum it will let you spend is say £3.50. And then straight away, well, that's the cheapest cost per click I could hope to get. And often we end up paying somewhere between the floor bid and the recommended price, I think, as a rule of thumb. In terms of when to use automated bidding, it's a really easy decision. If your click-through rate is above 1%, then it is more cost effective for reasons I won't go into now to run automated bidding, and that will actually lower your cost per click. So anything below 1%, I'd stick with manual. 1% and above, then you're smashing it, and feel free to turn on automated bidding.
Cool, that's some useful feedback there. Thank you, Lee. The next one is, what's the best way for me to extract leads from LinkedIn?
Cool. So yeah, so let's assume you're using the lead gen forms as we spoke to on that last slide. You can manually download them, which is quite a painful process because it involves you or the sales team going into the platform. But actually, LinkedIn integrates with a lot of the major CRM providers, HubSpot, Salesforce, people like this. So you can set up an integration ahead of time that will get your leads straight into your CRM system. Failing that, there's a tool that you might have come across called Zapier, spelled Zapier. And this is a really good tool for kind of building your own integrations. So you can, there's a ready-made integration for LinkedIn lead forms and say Google Sheets. So if our clients aren't running a major CRM that's supported, we'll often set up an integration for them where their leads go straight into a Google Sheet in real time that they can then manipulate as they see fit. So that's a really cost-effective solution, I would say.
Cool. Looks like we've got two more. The first one is, how can I target only certain companies?
Yeah, good question. So we call this target accounts, or sometimes it's called ABM, so account-based marketing. You've got two ways of achieving this. The first way is recommended if you've got only a few that you want to target. So this would be when you're actually building out the campaign and you're in that screen where you can choose your attributes in the same way that you can choose your job title. You can go to the company attributes and you can look for company name, and then you can just manually type in any companies that you want to target. They'll need to have a company profile is the key thing to mention when it comes to account-based targeting. So that's okay if you've got half a dozen or a few that you'd be willing to sort of sit there and type in. But if you've got a substantial target account list, which I hope you have, you want to head over to the settings, the assets tab, and then go down to matched audiences. And then you'll find at the top of that list, there's an upload contact or company list option. And then within that option screen, there's a template you can find. So you can download a CSV file. It will give you the headers, and then you can copy and paste the company details of the people that you want to reach. You can upload it back into the platform, and it's going to build a ready-made audience for you and show you what your match rate is for those people. So that's the preferred way to do it.
Great stuff. Then the last question is, will a recording be sent out? So yes, we will. When we follow up and send out a copy of the slides, we'll include a copy of the recording for you, Gemma, as well. Okay, so thank you, everyone. That looks like we've wrapped up all of the questions. So thank you again, Lee, for your input today, and again to everybody who's joined us. And we look forward to seeing you again on one of our upcoming sessions in the future. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.